morning cellists. Here we are in week 10, Technicals week, and this is our third lesson of the week, and we're going to progress from the stages we've looked at so far this week. You know, we looked at macro moves of the swoops. I'm focusing on the left hand because it is left hand again today. And then yesterday we looked at the same kind of shape of the arm but using a rocking motion and looking at vibrato and the methods to improve our vibrato. And today we're still looking at this kind of hand shape, and in fact we're going to consider the thumb. We're going to consider it in three different factors. The first is actually just its use right from the start when you first begin to learn the cello. You know, we have to think about where that thumb is positioned, and your formative teachers, I'm sure, will have told you to keep it behind the second finger when you're on the neck here. And you probably found it very often wandered to the first finger, and if you still find that problem, don't worry, you can retrain yourself. What you might find is if you retrain yourself to keep behind second, you'll keep slipping to first and you'll keep becoming a bit sharp, but you know, endeavour, and you can keep it behind second. Why? The reason why is we're trying to get this thumb pretty much in the centre of the palm, and you can see if I put my thumb across like that, that I'm looking to try and be in a position to support all the fingers, but particularly these two weaker ones, the third and fourth fingers. And you can see that by putting it behind the second, I have stretched my thumb across to the centre of the palm, and you are going to give more balance and strength, which will help with the vibrato, stretches, particularly stretches and moving around the instrument. You'll find you get a much bigger stretch between 1 and 4. If you keep your second finger and thumb together and try this, you can get an enormous stretch, whereas if you put it behind the first and try and stretch, you're very, very restricted. Can't stretch as far. So that's our first kind of consideration about the thumb, its position in the palm, in the lower positions here that we begin with in our learning. And then obviously the more obvious part of using the thumb is going to be the thumb position itself, and that normally begins the use and learning of it at the harmonic location, which is the halfway length of the string, and very often it is on these two strings that you might learn. However, I would suggest to you that you might try the middle two strings instead, same location, and that this may be an easier way in when you first begin, because one can feel a bit vulnerable on the A string as if you want to fall off, and it is also a thinner string and it can be a little bit more uncomfortable to tender thumbs that aren't used to it yet. So we'll take the middle two strings. There's also a sense of balance here. You know, you're sitting in the centre of the fingerboard, and I think you can feel a bit more of a sense of certainty and support. Things to consider if you are trying it out for the first time, or you're quite early in your learning of the thumb position, and you're wanting to press the strings to the fingerboard, which is what we are aiming to do ultimately. If it's tender, you could just, if you're not allergic to elastoplast, you could use a piece of elastoplast over that part of the thumb. Don't allow the pad to be part of that, because you need to be able to still be flexible and feel the strings. So, I mean, the ideal would be the fabric elastoplast or something similar that, you know, if you have allergies, obviously be careful there, to give yourself a bit of protection. You can also use a little bit of surgical spirit to slightly toughen up the skin along that part of the thumb so that you can cope better with it. And if you haven't got any of those things handy, to be honest with you, you could just put a little piece of soft fabric on your thumb and feel the sort of sliding up and down the instrument, and it protects it a little bit from that pressure of the metal. Luckily, when you first begin this, we can actually say just use a harmonics. So the thumb is at the half string length. I'm not pressing down, and I have a G and a D there, and that is stable, it's the right place. You can see that where the thumb is positioned, the tip of the thumb is not quite meeting the C string, but don't leave it too far over the other way. So typically the lower of the two strings would contact the thumb at near to the bed of the fingernail, and the other one will be near to your middle knuckle there. So we can begin with the harmonic if you've got a discomfort problem. Now, even when you first want to press down, get the harmonics first, then put all 3 fingers, remember we're not really using the little finger typically in this position, put all the 3 fingers on the lower of your 2 strings, in this instance G. They press the string down, and now you press your thumb down, and it's not quite so uncomfortable because the fingers have taken the pressure off for the most sensitive part of your thumb, which is the part near to the fingernail, the thumbnail. If I now take my fingers away and you keep the pressure, you may just last enough seconds holding it down if this is early days for you. Now, if you're a more seasoned cellist, this won't be an issue, and we can keep the thumb depressed the whole time, which is our aim. And of course the aim is that we can port any shape anywhere we like, even back here or really high up. Okay, so going back to this same location, those little demonstrations are a major scale shape, and it's rather delightful at this location to notice patterns and really to be thinking about building block patterns. So on both strings for the major, we have the same shape. We have a tone, then another tone, then a semitone. And this shape, if I turn my hand round like this, you can see between the thumb and the first finger is a tone, between the first and second is a tone, and second and third a semitone. And we just jump across the string and we'll have exactly the same shape here. There we have it, major scale done. And it's really important to get used to these shapes of the feeling of the second and third will probably touch each other absolutely at this point, and the first finger sitting right between the distance between 2 and the thumb. And there's your major scale shape. The next thing to get comfortable with will be the minor shapes. Now the first string for both minors will be the same, and this is where the second finger moves from being buddies with the third to being buddies with the first, i.e. I have now changed, so I now have a tone between my thumb and the first finger. First and second are semitones, they're right next to each other, and second and third will be a tone apart. So let's just try that on the string itself. And that this shape, with the 2 fingers sitting together in the middle there, is the same for both melodic and harmonic minors. Then for the melodic, we'll take the major shape to start with, going up, which you already know. Obviously on the way down it's a change. Now at this point it's a good idea, you've kept all your fingers in place on the string, slide your second finger back to meet the first, then the first back to meet the thumb, and we finish again with the same shape we had on the way up on the lower of the 2 strings. Now you may well find that E flat coming back right next to the D is terribly uncomfortable. I advise you to keep your nails as short as possible to make this more possible and more comfortable that it can be. But it is a very unnatural feeling to sort of push this first finger right up against the thumb. So going up and down with a little tiny slide here would be a good idea. You get this once, you've got it everywhere. You know, you can move this scale anywhere you like. Now the harmonic version, obviously we start the same. Then on the D string here, I'm going to have to push my first finger right back against the thumb, stretch out second, now it's probably just on the brink of possible for you to hold the first finger close to the thumb and stretch the second without releasing the first finger. But it may already be a point in your cello, depending on the stop length, that it's a little too far, in which case as you stretch out for this F sharp, you may find your first finger slides slightly to the floor, so be careful on the way back that you push it back to the thumb or your E flat will be too sharp. Okay, so off we go. Sorry. Thinking melodic for a moment there. So there we have the the shapes and feeling them as a kind of a plug and play kind of shape. So the major is really straightforward, same pattern on both strings, and the second and third are buddies. The minor, the first string, the first and second are buddies, and it's the same up and down for both of those scales. The melodic, we have the major going up, major top as it were, and we slide each finger back on the way down. So that's something you could get used to. You could take it out as a tiny cell to practice by itself. And then the harmonic is slightly more challenging with regard to the hand shape, because we may, as I mentioned, accidentally slide the first finger a little towards the floor as you're trying to reach out for a good high F sharp there. Now once you get reasonably comfortable with these patterns on the middle two strings, it would be good to port them over to the top two strings, which is the more standard location for your initial studies, but I've pointed out the reasons why I think you may be better starting the middle two strings. So of course we can try the very same shapes here. I mean, I am pressing down, but whilst you are developing strength with your thumb, you could get away with using the harmonic. The disadvantage of that is that your fingers have to work much harder to press the string down, from nothing being pressed down to being, you know, very, very taut at this point, for the first finger to do that by itself without the help. The idea is the thumb at this location means you could absolutely reduce the effort of the fingers. You barely need to press much at all to get them down, because the thumb has already secured the string to the fingerboard when you're pressing with that thumb. And of course it means we can port it. Even as far back as you like, really. There's a bit of an A major portion. Obviously the gaps are going to get much bigger. You can see the sort of difference there. And if we were move to a higher register, they're really, really tiny and close. If I just turn my hand around like that, teeny. So obviously there's quite a lot of adjustment, but you can see that once you've got the pattern, obviously you might have to change the shapes and distances between your fingers, but the pattern will remain constant, and you can literally plug and play. You know, for any key you like, you can play in the most awkward of keys. C flat major. See what you think that is normally. Right, so there's some thoughts about the shapes of your thumb position scales and how to become familiar with them. Now, naturally, you needn't stop there, and if these are all really very familiar to you, stretch yourself a little. We could do a whole tone scale, so beginning on this D, then back to a B flat, so obviously there's a big stretch here because I'm going up to a G sharp, and from the G sharp I must stretch way back to the B flat, stretch way forward to the G sharp, and so that really would challenge this stretching and this problematic first finger against the thumb there. So that's something you could try if you haven't before. The other things that we should consider in this location is the various arpeggios, because they give us, if you like, a skeletal structure to these shapes. So of course the major arpeggio, then the minor, and in terms of the shape, it's really what you need to get used to. You can see my second finger move from the major to the minor, major to the minor. I'm keeping my first finger down to remind my second finger where to go there. You could even try double stopping it, and maybe don't just stop there, but we could go back to a fourth, just see if that will work. And then if we make the minor version, we'll have a diminished fifth sitting in there somewhere. So what I'm doing is I'm keeping my thumb down the whole time. I'm keeping the second finger on either the F sharp or the F natural, and I'm putting my first finger on and off as we go up and down 3, 1, open 1, 3, keeping your second finger on either of those two lower notes there. So that's something else about hand shapes, contortions if you like, where you can try and feel the kind of three-dimensional shape across the two strings and feel real comfortable with that. Another arpeggio we should probably try would be the diminished arpeggio. In terms of finding the location on the lower string, because we're now changing where our standard shape is, you could go from the top. So I've got DB, stretch out for the G sharp here, and I've now brought my first finger forward to an F natural. So the first finger's on the F natural rather than the second. So again, it's about finding some portion of it which is reliable, this D at the top, and changing the hand shape in proportion to that. So there's 3 and 1 on the A string, displacing by a semitone forward to the D string. And there you have your diminished arpeggio in thumb position. Now, as I mentioned, we can port any of those shapes up or down the instrument, which means once you've got them, take them anywhere you like. Lovely, nice and easy. You can also quite helpfully use these, the thumb, for the lower positions here. Might not be able to see, but I've got my thumb right on the C string there, with a bit of D major in an octave there. Notice a good rise of the elbow, so that you are trying not to have a wrist, you know, if it was too low like this, you won't get the strength and support, and it even looks wrong. So go for a nice high elbow, so you actually get the arm weight coming down here and supporting your hand. This could be really useful particularly for repetitive oscillations, which you might easily find in orchestral cello parts or chamber music cello parts, maybe something like this, something like that, where you can take the strain out if something's happening an awful lot. Whatever the pattern is, you know, you can actually do that for a very long time. You know, you can actually comfortably manage that. Whereas if you were doing, you know, trying to stretch that octave and wiggle your fingers, you're going to start getting finger ache, you know, quite quickly. So there's an application at the lower part of the instrument. I mean, obviously, we can use the octaves as well. That's another factor that you can try out using the thumb. And the other thing, you could use it for thirds. I was just going back on G major there. And in the use of thirds, you'll be moving your thumb backwards and forwards as a semitone as you change from major to minor third. So these are all applications of the thumb in little technical exercises that you can find in any good scale or technical book. If you want something a bit more imaginative and beautifully written, absolutely turn to Popper, the High School of Studies. I have an ancient copy here, rather well worn, and so that's with the let's have a look, yes, IMC edition. I think that Berenreiter do the high school version now. They certainly do the intermediary Popper studies, which are also very well written. But if you're looking for excellent thumb position work, I mean, it's absolutely superb. It's also musically written, it's of harmonic interest, and it really does push the boundaries so you become going every part of the register of the cello, but beautifully written. So I totally recommend those if you want something more to do with your thumb position work and to really push yourself further. The last point on the use of the thumb today is actually as a marker and a measure when we descend scales. So if you're, for example, coming down from G major, keep your thumb a tone behind the first finger. That's going to mark where you're coming to next. I've got my thumb again, a tone behind, and I'm going to split the difference because I know I need a semitone move here. Hey, handy, huh? So when you're playing your scales, don't let your thumb move way back out of the way, partly because that's going to also give you a low knuckle here, so you don't get strength. You know, keep it close, means you keep nice high knuckles, which gives nice strength to the finger. Your arm will help your finger then. And at the same time, we're providing ourselves with a little measuring guide. And initially you can look at it and see where you're moving to, but as you get more used to it, you can just feel that. So you don't have to look, and you can get a really good sense of confidence about where you're shifting back to on any of your scales, obviously, and you just need to become familiar with which shift is involved. And it might depend on which fingering. I'm just showing you standard fingering there, but there is, of course, one, the universal fingering of everything in threes, well, a pair at the bottom and then everything in threes, in which case you'd have a slightly different shift pattern. But whichever scale fingering you're using, know what is the distance between each group of notes that you're shifting back to, and then you can use your thumb as a guide. It'll either be a tone or a semitone in practically all instances, in which case you can use that as a measuring stick. Anyway, I hope you've had some use out of this video on the thumb, and it's 3 different applications. Centre to the palm in the lower positions as a fantastic way to make it easy and delightful to move across any area of the upper instrument, which also includes double stopping, whether it's thirds or octaves or any other interval. Obviously you can choose fourths or anything you like, and also as a measuring stick as we come down scales. There you go, the life of the thumb. Enjoy.